So this is the edition, Baby Angel Geronimo editions. This is part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast on the internet, only on the internet, not on satellite, not on terrestrial, and not on cable networks, only on the internet, whatever network that can be called. And this is part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast from London in the UK. The timing and the time timed at 11:30 hours GMT, that is 11:30 British Standard Time on Tuesday, the 25th of January 2022. This is 2 minutes before 11:30, but it is timed at 11:30. And part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel. And the theme, the overall theme is Baby Angel Geronimo editions, because everything that we are covering in the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street is concerning the corruption, the lying, the deception, the illegality, the brazenness, defiance of the laws, summarized in the heading in the Johnson's problems grow with birthday party leak. Now, in that kind of introduction on page 1 of the I newspaper, they have got the last paragraph in the description saying further allegations expected as a Tory former minister tells the I newspaper Dominic Cummings has gone feral, meaning that the disclosures, the revelations, the leaks against Boris Johnson and contextually against his kind of wife, well, his current wife, let's say. This is a multiply married, multiply exposed adulterer who has been serially engaged in adultery while still married to someone. So this is probably the third marriage, formal marriage. And he has cheated on his last wife, Marina Warner, a licensed law trader. Marina Wheeler. Wheeler and Warner both spelled with the W. So there is a confusion there in the kind of spelling. And this is the one that is about the birthday party. But the one about the anti-Muslim sacking of the MP Nusrat Ghani is not being linked with the activities, the feral activities on the part of Dominic Cummings. Not so far anyway. And this is the piece that is part of the package of wrongdoings by Boris Johnson. Now, nobody in the news in the world, anywhere, news about any part of the world, including Burkina Faso, where there has been a coup in the last, reported in the last 24 hours. Burkina Faso coup staged by the so-called army, who kind of have stated in their broadcast and the statement explaining the reason for the coup, activities by the jihadists. Now, Burkina Faso in Africa is a landlocked country with 60% or thereabouts of the population being Muslim. To what extent they are actual true adherents of Islam is a very different matter indeed. And we shall come back to the Muslim kind of dimension shortly. And Burkina Faso, the military coup doesn't feature. Not so far that I'm looking at the I newspaper. Doesn't look as front page or headline news in the Western papers. And part of the reason being that Burkina Faso is a former French imperialist colony, which explains why there is the French language in use. That's a contrast. It's a contrast and a comparison with Thomas Babington Macaulay about the subcontinent in the 1830s, mid 1830s, 1835. Because I'm still looking for Burkina Faso and there is no mention. There is no mention of Burkina Faso in this edition of the I newspaper, which includes and contains some of the. It's like a kind of Reader's Digest. Sometimes it runs things from the other papers, like this one on page 3 of today's edition. A fish called Goldie, just back from the dentist. Now, this is the fish called Goldie, and it's a female, they say, and she had a kind of procedure at the dentist by the vet at Sandhole Veterinary Centre in Kent, in England. And Goldie lives with Mark Byatt in Kent. And Goldie has got the process, and the process, it appears, might need to be repeated because she hasn't been eating like other fishes that actually deal with the growth of the teeth naturally, because so this is called porcupine pufferfish, have long teeth that keep growing throughout their lives, but they are generally kept short because they eat lots of hard-shelled food which grind the teeth down. But apparently Goldie didn't have a taste for them. While these foods are provided in her home environment, she's not as forthcoming in eating them as her other tank mates. Veterinary surgeon Daniel Calvo Carasso told The Guardian. So this is a piece that appeared in The Guardian, and the I newspaper has wisely repeated this. So we shall be talking about Goldie, and we shall go into Goldie's kind of details in our social media posts, including Twitter and Facebook accounts, and the account on WordPress, because we've got several social media accounts which we update more frequently than the frequency of this broadcast for various technical reasons. So this is the latest Johnson's problems. And there is nothing in any newspaper or any news item that the Fleet Street papers have actually treated as news, worthy of news. Let's see the Times, if the Times has got anything about Burkina Faso. Why Burkina Faso? Because I'm looking for a comparison. I mean, if there is any news that remotely compares with the stupidity, daily stupidity and idiocy of Boris Johnson or about Boris Johnson. Now, what the Times says on the page one, top of page one is Richard Branson is talking about what is wrong with schools. Well, I have been talking extensively about schools and schooling for far longer than Richard Branson has been doing. So that is not news to me. Only news is that the reason why they are recognizing Richard Branson's opinion about what is wrong with schools, because he is white, that is, he is European, and he is not of African or Asian origin or identity, and most certainly not a Muslim. In the week when Muslimness has been admitted as being the target of anti-Muslim Boris Johnson and the target of the rest of the anti-Muslim post holders in the cabal that is fronted by Boris Johnson. And this is a very timid two-page spread about that very topic, Muslims. And it says, the Times says that this could trigger equalities inquiry. Well, that's timid because the inquiry that Equalities Commission may conduct will be a completely racist whitewash, because the organization itself has been condemned in the past, not long ago, for being anti-Muslim and racist. And there is a side piece by Kaya Burgess, religious affairs correspondent. There is a man with a Muslim beard and a Muslim cap, let's say, who is described in the heading Imam, advising on Islamophobia. Now remember, we don't accept Islamophobia in the sense that Fleet Street uses. We mean by Islamophobia, as they are using it, as anti-Muslim. But that is, this reading of the heading is just for the record as a reference, not a statement by us. Now, sacking a Muslim MP could trigger equalities inquiry. Now, that will be a whitewash, a racist wash, and an anti-Muslim wash as well. And this is the front page of the Times today. This is the front page. Because of the reflection on the screen, it may not look very clear, but it says, Johnson held lockdown birthday party at number 10. And the same stable as the Times, owned by the same dirty digger Murdoch, is the scum, which is running an extremely rare headline against the liar Boris Johnson. This is it. It says you can't have your birthday cake and eat it, Boris. That is a phrase that's a colloquial. You can't have your cake and eat it. Is a colloquial kind of phrase, which means that you can't have both. Boris Johnson had an indoor birthday party. Now, reading that again by Harry Cole. Boris Johnson had an indoor birthday celebration at the height of the first lockdown. Number 10 admitted last night. Then finance fiancé Carrie is said to have brought a cake as 30 staff sang happy birthday when he turned 56 in June 2020. Amid fury at the latest COVID Partygate revelation, Downing Street insisted the PM was only there for 10 minutes. Now, there is a pattern in that statement that refers to the length of time that Johnson was present at an illegal law-breaking event. Because this is not the first time, this is not the first item about which Johnson has issued precise length of time he was present at an illegal law-breaking event. And Harry Cole has got a short piece in the two-page spread on pages 4 and 5 of we call it Scum, but let's call it for reference, the Sun of Tuesday, the 25th of January 2022. Harry Cole also appeared on Sky News last night, along with Pippa Crerar, his counterpart at the Daily Mirror, doing so-called review of the papers of today. As we have said, this is not that is not a review; it is a promotion for the papers. This is the piece by Harry Cole on page 5 of the Scum, factions circling from all angles. Now, far from bringing Boris Johnson's leadership crisis to a head, Sue Gray's report into bad behavior at number 10 is just the overture. It will not draw a line under the Partygate saga because the Prime Minister's Tory enemies have already moved on to the next scandal. Shells are now falling on number 10 out of the blue and from all angles, cheered on by former advisor Dominic Cummings, who has vowed regime change. One cabinet minister said yesterday, for the first time, I am worried. There are just too many people trying to kill him now. Last week, it was Brexiteer William Bragg, with allegations of mob-handed whips blackmailing MPs. This week's, and this is just a reference, we are not agreeing with the use of the term. This week it's Islamophobia from sacked Minister Nusrat Ghani, an ally of leadership rival Jeremy Hunt. MPs were quick to spot both are key players in the 1922 committee. The Tory power brokers increasingly agitating for a change of boss. All prime ministers have to deal with the blue on blue sniping from a combination of the past it and the past over. But given there were 3 elections in just 5 years, the disgruntled pile is even larger than usual. Johnson has a uniquely large number of Tory party factions annoyed with him, all at the same time. Bitter Remainers will always hate him, but their numbers are too few. Johnson is also dangerously exposed to Brexiteers, fed up with the slow rate of deregulation away from the European Union and lockdowns. The cabinet ally said there is no way he can please both these groups at the same time. To suck up to one side, he's got to alienate the other. Add to that the red wallers, worried about their marginal seats, and Shire Tories angry over big spending to prop up the 2019 northern gains. But as one minister warns, a bloody civil war is a direct route to losing power, saying they're just not scared enough of how rubbish opposition is because most of them have never felt it. So, this is typical political editor's opinion in Fleet Street, which is absolute rubbish because they're not. Harry Cole is not ever kind of rigorous. Being the political editor of the Sun, he cannot be rigorous and be in that post as well. Because the Sun is essentially the scum. It's not the newspaper of intellect, evidence, rigor, analysis, democracy, accountability, whatsoever. It's a newspaper, it's a newspaper like kind of presentation, if you like, packaging absolute rubbish and inconsequential kind of comments, which is the same thing that is done by the professional career liar, Quentin Letts. The Quentin Letts is a professional liar, and we shall come to the topics, not the substance. The Quentin Letts has a piece supporting Johnson, and it says your essential guide to who's who in the 22. That is, he's doing a kind of hatchet job. That is to say, he's trying to justify an attack on the 1922 committee. That is the committee representing the Conservative MPs, backbenchers. They're not ministers, they are just a committee. But that committee is on the record as playing significant roles, not necessarily always formally publicizing what they actually do talk about, but this is a committee that is often mentioned at times of leadership of the Conservative Party. And that is why Quentin Letts, who is a corrupt, racist, right-wing, fascist kind of denier of democracy, accountability. So he said the trade union for Tory MPs is run by has-beens, wannabes, and that terrible nice chap from Dad's army. Now, that is an insult, trade union, because the Conservatives don't recognize trade unions and trade unions' rights. So to call a group of Conservative MPs trade union must have been part of a scripting to denounce the 1920 committee. And it is made worse, aggravated by members being called has-beens, that is, the failures who tried to be leaders and have failed, and wannabes, and those who still want to be leaders or occupy senior positions in government. That is Quentin Letts in a paragraph that is giveaway, and he's attacking all the 22 committee, and especially he has singled out the 1922 vice chairs are William Ragg and Nusrat Ghani. Brexiteers who have turned against Johnson, both a little publicity prone, as a junior transport minister, Ghani 49 was enthusiastic rather than cerebral. Gosh, she was cross when demoted in 2020, though she should have been promoted instead. She has since made little effort to disguise her play peak. Rag 34 going on 60 carries less of the tang of vengeance and was a model of old world understatement when he accused the whips of intimidating backbenchers. Interested in campaignology, he seems intent on trolling the bell for Boris. So this is a whole piece by Quentin Letts attacking the 22 committee and attacking the people who are trying to stop the rule fronted by the cabal, Boris Johnson cabal, ruled by liars, criminals, and crooks. And there is a brief piece about Julian Assange, who the Times says has won a stay of extradition as case heads for the Supreme Court, that is the British Supreme Court, not the American Supreme Court. We shall not be going into Julian Assange in detail at this stage, except to note that. And this is a rarity. Our note is that this is a rarity that anything that is passed through or processed through an English court about America, the state of USA, is hardly kind of decided by the court concerned by ruling against the USA. That is the point. And this is just a temporary opportunity allowed to Julian Assange to make an appeal to the UK Supreme Court. It doesn't mean that the UK Supreme Court will agree with Julian Assange and dismiss the government's collusion and complicity with the USA bid to get Julian Assange extradited to the USA. Now, there is a short piece on page 28 of the Times that calls Elizabeth Truss the front runner so far, among the front runners to succeed Boris Johnson if he is to be replaced. And this is a former Australian Prime Minister has mounted a scathing attack on Britain, saying Australia's oldest ally suffers from delusions of grandeur and relevance deprivation. Paul Keating, who left office in 1996, said the UK was led by a disreputable government and labelled Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, demented. Keating, 78, who succeeded Bob Hawke as Labour Prime Minister in 1991, released his statement on Sunday after Scott Morrison's government hosted Truss and Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, in Sydney, as the allies working to counter China's influence in the region. The Kenneth Keating's attack was prompted by an interview that Truss gave to the Sydney Morning Herald, in which she said that China could replicate a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine through aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. Keating said, "The reality is Britain does not add up to a row of beans when it comes to East Asia. Truss would do us all a favor by highlighting it back to her collapsing, disreputable government, leaving Australia to find its own way in Asia. Keating has previously said that Australia should not come to Taiwan's aid in the event that China attempts to invade the self-governing island. Now, this paragraph, not the last one, but the penultimate one, which contains this quotation. The reality is Britain does not add up to a row of beans when it comes to East Asia. Truss would do us all a favor by highlighting it back to her collapsing, disreputable government, leaving Australia to find its own way in Asia. The collapsing, disreputable government are the three words that matter in that particular statement, in addition to the fact that Liz Truss is demented. That is what Paul Keating has said. And there is a piece by Janet Jackson, the younger sister of Michael Jackson, saying in a documentary about her hometown, Gary, Indiana, and reflects on her childhood and the abuse claims against Michael. And she says in this series of reports that are being published quite widely because of the reference to Michael Jackson, not Janet Jackson, but Michael Jackson, that Jackson abused her verbally and said belittling things to her, about her, and she has not overcome those. Now, this is something that has hardly been said before by any member of the Jackson family. And this reminds of the time when Jackson was a black-skinned person. I mean, Jackson's degeneration into multiple identities, the most kind of significant and noticeable being his kind of attempt to paint himself, color himself white. Now, this is, in my view, the reason why Jackson did all of those things to look white, etc., are direct products and consequences of racism, not the only type of consequences, but those are very significant because of the kind of popular spot in society and publicity that Michael Jackson occupies. Now, here is a piece on page 42. Now, this is something very serious, and yet it's reduced to page 42 of the Times. Read the heading. Gangs of youths molest women in Italy's lawless migrant ghettos. And they've got a picture of a 20-year-old they are calling Baby Gang 20, a rapper born in Italy to Moroccan parents, has been jailed several times. Now, this is the tip of the iceberg, of course, because the violation of children and women and boys in kind of degenerate locations across Western Europe, like for example this one, in Italy's lawless migrant ghettos, This is a tip of the iceberg, and there is no rights. There is no redress through the legal system available to the victims of sexual violence and violations that women suffer in those places. So the paragraph, two paragraphs before the last one, it says, a thriving rap music scene in San Siro has produced national stars 700. My local group of rappers has notched up 14 million views on YouTube. Zakaria Muhib, 20, born in Italy to Moroccan parents. That's the name of this boy. To Moroccan parents, raps under the name Baby Gang and has been in and out of jail for years. He was arrested this week for alleged mugging offenses. Of course, drugs are nothing new in San Siro, but the young pushers are taking over the streets from Italian criminals. The man accused of the January 8 shooting is Carlo Testa, a local said to have ties to the 'Ndrangheta, the Calabrian mafia. Police believe there is still time to stop the suburb of Milan and Turin following the suburbs of Milan and Turin following the French example, with one officer claiming there are no no-go areas for us, unlike in France, and they're comparing similar situation in France. Now, as we have said many times, the reason why there are kind of areas in England identified as Indians, as Pakistanis, and as Bangladeshis, but whatever the actual numerical comparison in terms of numbers, the reason why there are these areas is a direct result of racist kind of denials of rights by the state in the UK to people from Africa and Asia. For example, Brixton in Lambeth. For quite a while, Brixton was known as the front line for the Caribbean people, mainly from Jamaica. And Notting Hill, significantly, again, linked to Caribbean people of African origin. The reason why these happened is not accidental. The reason is that anywhere else, if the people of African or Caribbean origins and backgrounds chose to live independently of any ethnic kind of concentration, they would be attacked, violated, and cornered. That is the experience on which later generations decided to live next to people of their own ethnic backgrounds. And this can be extrapolated to explain why people in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Leeds, and other places, big towns in Bristol, for example, have been living next to people of their own ethnic backgrounds, etc. Same applies to the Bangladeshis in Brick Lane, of course. And there are people in Newham, next door to Tower Hamlets, where significant numbers of people from Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and Indian origins live not far from one another. But the electoral demography in Tower Hamlets, in Hackney, in Newham, and in other boroughs across the east of London, and in Southall to the west, and in the west of London, the Indians. And in Birmingham, similar kind of ethnic concentrations or nationality background concentrations are directly explicable by reference to the now increasing intolerance, racist intolerance in Britain. Racist intolerance never kind of were tolerably of a tolerable level, bearable level for any of these communities to have any confidence in living next to white neighbors or in white neighborhoods. So racist intolerance has been too kind of high in numbers and too hostile, too strong in the obstruction and denial of the basic rights and basic kind of civility to the neighbors coming from backgrounds, African backgrounds, Asian backgrounds, whether through the African backgrounds, whether directly from Africa or via the Caribbean. So this week's or the current kind of references to the Muslimness of Nusrat Ghani being used by the Conservatives, fronted by Boris Johnson, as ground for her to be dismissed from the Johnson government is not news. It is news in the sense that the individual featuring in the news is not the same as those that have been featuring over the decades. But the principle of racism is not new. Principle of racism, the values of intolerance, is not new. And if we look at the item on page 41 of today's Times, the heading reads, Court to rule on race bias at US universities. Again, it's racism. And racism that doesn't need the targets of racism to be told about things like this or the experience attributable to Nusrat Ghani, to know that this is not news, this is not new. So this is a piece from Washington, byline to David Charter, and it reads, the first paragraph reads, American universities may be barred from using affirmative action to increase Black and Hispanic student numbers after the Supreme Court agreed to rule on positive discrimination. Now, positive discrimination in the USA has been the subject of regular, persistent controversy. That fact that it has been the subject of persistent controversy for decades is proof that the USA is controlled by racist institutions and everything else. So here, the second paragraph says, the justices divided 6-3 between conservatives and liberals agreed to hear challenges to admissions programs that take race into account at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. Although precedents, that is, examples, were set by the nation's highest court in favor of some positive discrimination at universities in 1978, 2003, and 2016, there are signs that the supermajority following the appointment of 3 conservative justices under President Trump could end that policy. The decision on affirmative action is likely to take place in the autumn. Now, they are referring to that same one that caused the biggest controversy during his appointment by Trump. Brett Kavanaugh, one of Trump's appointments, opposed affirmative action in 1999 while a lawyer in private practice. He described a government program for native Hawaiians as a naked racial spoils system. He wrote in a column that the Supreme Court would eventually and inevitably find that in the eyes of government we are just one race. John Roberts, the Chief Justice, seen as a consensus builder on many issues, has been a steadfast vote to limit the use of race in public policy. Once writing, "It's a sordid business, this divvying us up by race." The justices agreed to hear appeals by Students for Fair Admissions, a group founded by Edward Blum, an anti-affirmative action activist, against lower court rulings that upheld the policies at Harvard and UNC. Blum's group accused Harvard of discriminating against Asian American and UNC of discriminating against white and Asian Americans. Harvard, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, is a private university founded in 1636 that receives federal funds. Its admission is 1/4 Asian American, 16% black, and 13% Hispanics. If Harvard were to abandon race conscious admissions, African Americans and Hispanics representation would decline by nearly half. The university told the Supreme Court in urging it to stay out of the case. Lawrence Bacow, the president of Harvard, said that the decision to hear the case puts at risk 40 years of legal precedent granting colleges and universities the freedom and flexibility to create diverse campus communities. Beth Keith, the associate vice chancellor at University of North Carolina for university communications, said, "As the trial court held, our process is considered with long-standing Supreme Court precedent and allows for an evaluation of each student in a deliberate and thoughtful way." Bloom said, "In a multiracial, multi-ethnic nation like ours, the college admissions bar cannot be raised for some races and ethnic groups but lowered for others. Our nation cannot remedy past discrimination and racial preferences with new discrimination and different racial preferences." Now, this takes us back to the main theme that we broadcast and we state and update about the international treaties and obligations that derived from and linked to the founding declarations of the United Nations organization itself. In our view, on the evidence of the last, let's say, 75 years or so, since the de facto foundation of the United Nations organization, not a single one of the United Nations founding aims has been consistently, rigorously advocated for by the United Nations itself. If you look at the current social media posts, including the posts by the current incumbent in the second term in the office of Secretary General, the Portuguese politician, you will find that he is completely absolutely daily kind of ignoring racism, ignoring the founding declarations of the United Nations. Instead, Anthony Guterres, whom on the evidence we have called gutless, that is morally gutless. Antonio Gutless goes into diversions, and he concentrates on childish posts about issues that should be left to the various UNO agencies. This is a very dishonest person. He's a Portuguese former prime minister whose wiki entry is stuffed full of congratulations for him. He may be due congratulations on many things he was involved in as politician in Portugal. But as the official incumbent in the post of the chief executive of the United Nations, Gutless has been completely racist and totally contemptuous of the founding aims and purpose or purposes of the United Nations organization. The fact that this piece doesn't refer, this piece in the Times about the USA Supreme Court intervention and role, doesn't mention the United Nations at all, doesn't mention the founding aims and objects of the United Nations, doesn't mention any of the kind of consequent human rights legislation across the world, shows that for key purposes, the United Nations is being treated as a completely dead organization. And the same comment about the United Nations being treated as a completely dead organization applies to what is happening in the news about Russia and Ukraine. That shows that the United Nations is not a party in intervening to stop this, not in the news. If there are secret communications taking place, then they're secret, and the fact that they're secret completely kind of exposes the uselessness of the holder of the office of the Secretary General, because it is not something that the United Nations should be kind of allowing as an organization to be happening. That the United Nations founding aims and objects being completely ignored by the chief executive post holder. As I said in my Channel 4 broadcast lasting only a few minutes in January, this is January 2022, and I said that 30 years ago, January 1992. So it's exactly 30 years to the month that I broadcast on this slot. The slot is an end of the news at 7 on Channel 4 slot. It was called the slot. And most of the people who presented the slot came from the political parties, etc., etc. I was probably the most rarest of the non-office holder persons presenting that. And that was 30 years ago, exactly this month. And what I said was prompted by the fact that in January 1992, the UK, as a member of the UNO, was going to chair the General Assembly that was taking place in literally a few days' time. And the Prime Minister of the UK was going to the United Nations, and he was John Major. And the theme that John Major chose for his main address to the General Assembly of the United Nations in January 1992 was to focus on the kind of economically poorer nations, states, poorer than China, let's say, poorer than the USA, poorer than the UK, poorer than similar economies that coincidentally, well, including France, remained members and still remain members of the Security Council. And John Major's theme in 1992, January 1992, was to have a go at the poorer nations which also had plans to acquire nuclear weapons or had already acquired nuclear weapons. And he was going to condemn the tendency and the purpose. Now, without going into a discussion about nuclear weapons in this program, let's say that although it is potentially very dangerous, the fact that any nation could, quote, aspire or have ambitions or plans to acquire nuclear power, nuclear weapons, cannot be separated from the situation in which it was placed. For example, in the case of the subcontinent, there is serious rivalry between India and Pakistan, and both have nuclear weapons. Now, if the United Nations and the Security Council were serious about nuclear weapons, then members of the Security Council, and especially the UK, because I'm contextually referring to the UK Prime Minister John Major going to the United Nations in January 1992, the UK would have been active to create an atmosphere of tolerance and peaceful neighborliness between India and Pakistan. But it hasn't. It hasn't done that. It hadn't done that until January 1992 when I presented the program. And my decision to write the script and to broadcast on the theme of dealing with ending poverty and hunger at root. Poverty and hunger meaning that those people who are impelled, sometimes compelled to leave their own home countries and become migrants heading for the West. Those people who find themselves in that kind of situation, or at the time of my presentation of the program on Channel 4, did find themselves in the situation that they did, were put in those positions by the absence of an alternative or absence of alternatives to migrating away from their countries of origin, birth. And over the last 30 years, up to this month, over the last 30 years since my broadcast against the Western failure, negligence to end poverty at roots for these people, these countries have not done anything to end poverty. In fact, the attack on Afghanistan and Iraq that took place about 10 years plus since my broadcast on Channel 4 television exacerbated the dire emergency and the need for people to seek refuges and asylums in the West. So, while we are talking about the diagnosis of Fleet Street, remember I've just read the piece in the Times today, had a court to rule on race bias at US universities. Byline to David Charter in Washington. This is what this is about, the ending hunger at root, ending poverty at root, meant and means ending the dependence on the people of the host countries by the migrants that have been forced and are being forced and have been being forced to leave their countries of origin. So there is no debate in the Western political kind of system, like in Parliament. There is no debate in the House of Commons. There is no debate in the House of Peers in the UK. And there is no debate by the US Senate or the Congress about the causes and the origins of racism, causes and origins of the various practices that are discriminatory against all sections of the population except the controlling kind of minority, really. That is the white European class or group. And the United Nations has got Human Rights High Commission, whatever, but they are dead. They're not dealing with the issues. They're not looking for realistic and daily relevant answers to the causes of migration, to causes of poverty, causes of emigration, causes of hunger and lack of human rights. And poverty and hunger and lack of human rights take up most people's lives in Africa and Asia, and in huge parts of what is called Latin America or South America. And in the USA, very significant numbers of the people, because they come from Asian backgrounds, come from African backgrounds, and other non-European backgrounds. Same applies to Canada. Although demographically Canada is much smaller than the USA, the same ratio or ratios apply. And this applies to the UK, this applies to France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Sweden, and other Western European countries. So the news, kind of the heating up of the relationship between Putin-fronted Russia and the Western countries, including the network, the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This too is the direct result of the United Nations behaving as a dead bureaucracy. And as I said before, not in this edition before, but in previous editions, on the facts, those who were incumbent in posts that Anthony Guterres is currently occupying for the second term now, like Bubu Ghali, the Egyptian moron, Boutros Ghali, the Egyptian moron, and he was followed by the Ghanaian. And then there was another one from Southeast Asian background. And before all of them, there was this one from Burma called U Thant. All these incumbents in the post of Secretary General of the United Nations have played the part of stooge, either the USA stooge or stooge of combined alliances. And what has been common among them has been the total failure to make the United Nations a talking point to the world's public. And this is the case now. I mean, the likes of the Daily Mail kind of get very excited whenever they're able to stage a headline against Putin's Russia and Ukraine. And Biden, who is mocked by the Fleet Street papers on all counts because they're all supporters of Donald Trump, Biden becomes very much alive. I mean, normally they refer to Biden as almost half dead, half senile, etc., etc. But when it comes to referring to the USA, set to send 50,000 American troops to help Ukraine against Russia, these same papers which mock Biden become unbelievably excited at the vibrancy of the Joe Biden regime. Vibrancy as a warmonger. So when we say that we present world exclusive original diagnosis of Fleet Street, we literally mean that. Because we are saying that all these newspapers are dead, ethically dead, morally dead, and factually completely unreliable and untrustworthy. And in the case of the Johnson-fronted cabal in the UK and Johnson's kind of regime, Johnson's career, these papers are complicit with Johnson. They mislead the people whom we call the gullibles or the Little Englanders, who are mainly intellectually, not cerebral. Because Quentin Letts, the racist anti-Muslim liar, says that Nusrat Ghani is intellectually lacking, challenged. He forgets that the overwhelming majority of the scum where he got the money from the dirty digger for so long, the majority of the people in this country, in England, are cerebrally far behind Nusrat Ghani. Not only are they challenged, they are absolutely non-existent. So there, in his stupidity, Quentin Letts actually exposes himself as an anti-Muslim, as a racist, and as a denier of the truth on the ground about the intellectual capacity of the people in Little England. What do we mean by Little England in this context? By Little England, we mean those who believe, those who have been brainwashed to believe, those who have been conditioned mentally to believe and think, quote, think, that Little England is actually in areas, in size, and everything else bigger than the rest of the whole world. That is how grotesque and stupid so many millions of people have been made to be by the brainwashing and conditioning that takes place by Fleet Street and accompanying counterparts, platforms like the broadcasting, radio, and television networks that they rely on. These are people that don't think intellectually, that don't think rigorously. They most certainly don't think morally, they don't think ethically, and they don't think universally. They don't think democratically. They don't think transparently. They don't think in accordance with justice and fairness. Why do all these things matter? Because these are the values that make the difference, whether the society, the world are fair or not, whether the society or the world are exposed to unnecessary, unjustified cruelty and massacres, which is what these frequently excitable references to the Ukraine kind of represent. So when it comes to John kind of Barker, who has been one of the people featuring in the observations on Boris Johnson, Barker has been dismissed by Fleet Street for being vindictive against Boris Johnson. And the reason why they say that he has been vindictive against Boris Johnson is because Johnson plainly blocked Barker being placed or inflicted or inflict onto the House of Peers. That has been the normal routine for former speakers of the House of Commons. And the reason why Barker has been denied, according to his side, not necessarily quoting Barker himself, but those who argue that case, is to do with the fact that he produced formidable series of obstacles against the right-wing Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers. But Barker, in his substantive comment about Johnson, has said words to the effect that he, Barker, had witnessed the careers of 12 prime ministers in his adult life, and that Boris Johnson was the worst of the 12. Not only that, that Boris Johnson was worst by a country mile, has been the phrase used by John Barker. Now, is that just venom? Is that just spite? Or does that kind of opinion refer to the reality of the lives of millions of people who are affected by decisions made by Johnson in that post? And the answer must be, of course, that Johnson has to be treated as affecting the lives of people. For example, all these parties that he has been having, all the parties that Johnson has been having, have been held as events that were in breach of the law. The very law that Johnson himself and his kind of regime and cabal have insisted on being followed and observed and complied with by the ordinary people, the many, including the Little Englanders and those who are not believers of Little England, but part of the population of the UK. It is so degenerate that even the scum, which is a firm Johnson supporter, is condemning him now on the front page. And the Daily Mail, which is equally ferocious in its kind of complicity with the criminality of Johnson, has got this similar kind of factual piece on the front page, but not as the main front page splash. That's the piece that the Mail is running, while the scum or the Sun is running, giving the whole page. That's the scum, whole page, and that's the Mail, which is a third of the front page. And then on pages 6 and 7, so this is the pages 6 and 7 about Johnson on day of the party. And the Mail, of course, being anti-Muslim, is blaming Nusrat Ghani as the reason for sparking another probe, another investigation. But the main spread is about Johnson's party. birthday party. Now, as we said, the Fleet Street newspapers, these are appearances, these are kind of images that they are running that suggest that they are actually covering the scandals, the illegality, the criminality, the breaches of the law by Johnson himself. But that's not true, because in their actual editorial opinions, these papers want Johnson to get out of this crisis. And this is evident in the actual words, the phrases, and they're highlighting this one. It was a surprise event, and Prime Minister only stayed for 10 minutes, says Downing Street. Now, let's look at the actual kind of interpretation of the law. One, the law is applied against ordinary people. You break the law if you stay 10 minutes or if you stay longer. If you even enter the event, that is illegal. That's the crux of the definition and interpretation and application. And so the fact that the Daily Mail is highlighting that fact about 10 minutes is evidence of the Daily Mail looking for pretexts to excuse Johnson. And again, as I said, the minute they find a pretext to refer to Ukraine and Putin, they make Boris Johnson not the embodiment of crime, illegality, corruption, lying. They find him in a Churchill mode, the fantasy that he harbors. It says Boris warns Putin that invasion of Ukraine would be disastrous. Now, when was an invasion not disastrous? An invasion always is disastrous. And yet they're making it a unique achievement on the part of Boris Johnson that he has said that. So they've got a ongoing, the Daily Mail and the Sun have got a continuing interest in Angela Rayner allegedly having a relationship with a married Labour MP from Ilford. And there is a piece, of course, about the Tory member of the House of Peers, Agnew, who was imposed as the so-called fraud czar. That is to say, he was imposed to deal with fraud. Now, there is a piece in the Mail as well about this professor being strip searched by the Metropolitan Police in an inappropriate derogatory language. So the professor's strip search ordeal at hands of the Metropolitan Police. And this professor's last name, or is it her kind of full name, Constancia Duff, sounds like an Eastern European name, the first one. And the second one sounds like a British name, Duff. So she appears to be either related to somebody with a name called Duff or married to a person with Duff. So let's look at the kind of description of the event. Professor strip search ordeal at hands of the Metropolitan Police. Police apologize over officers' sexist and derogatory language. Scotland Yard has apologized to an academic after officers joked about her knickers as she was strip searched. Constancia Duff, an assistant professor of philosophy, sued after being subjected to the degrading examination and sexualized mockery. She was held for intervening in the arrest of a boy of 15 by trying to hand him a card listing his legal rights. The forces said paid her compensation after CCTV emerged showing that officers cut off her clothes and made sexual, derogatory, and unacceptable remarks at a custody center. Dr. Duff's ordeal began on May 5, 2013. Now, this is 11 years. No, 9 years. 9 years since the incident on the 5th of May, when she saw officers searching the boy on an estate in London and advised him to give a no comment interview. She was taken to a Stoke Newington police station for refusing to cooperate. Sergeant Curtis Howard ordered colleagues to search her by any means necessary, adding, "Treat her like a terrorist. I don't care." 3 female officers bound Dr. Duff by her hands and feet, pinning her to the floor as they cut her clothes off with scissors after she refused to provide her name. After the search, a male officer asked, "Didn't find anything untoward on her, ladies?" To which a female officer replied, "A lot of hair." There was more laughter when a male officer, going through her possessions, asked, sorry, what's that smell?" A male colleague joked, "Oh, it's her knickers, yeah?" In just one of a series of offensive remarks, a female officer added, "You I feel disgusting. I'm going to need a shower. Another chipped in, asking, is she rank? The officers claimed they acted with professionalism, strip searching her for her own safety. But Dr. Duff, who was cleared of wrongdoing by magistrates, told The Guardian it was so obviously not what they were doing at the time. They were doing it as punishment. They were doing it as intimidation. They wanted to soften me up and get my details. She said the exchange obtained as part of her legal claim exposed the culture of sexualized mockery, the dehumanizing attitude of officers. The crucial issue is that racism, misogyny, and sexual violence are normalized in policing, said Dr. Duff, an academic at the University of Nottingham, who has written widely on the politics of police abolition. And the way in which they treated me, the fact that that's normal is shown by the way that at every level of the system it was rubber stamped for 8 years. So it's 9 years and it has taken 8 years battle. Dr. Duff has previously described suffering post traumatic stress disorder and flashbacks following her arrest. Inspector Andy O'Donnell of the Metropolitan Police's Directorate of Professional Standards told her, I'd like to sincerely and unreservedly apologize for the sexist, derogatory, and unacceptable language used about you and for any upset and distress this may have caused. Sergeant Howard was cleared of gross misconduct by a disciplinary panel in 2018. That was 5 years after the incident. The force said allegations of misconduct were still under investigation. Scotland Yard is battling accusations of widespread sexism following the rape and murder of Sarah Everett by one of its firearms officers. Now, this is something that is very rare because similar incidents, hundreds of similar incidents, take place every single year, if not more. And this one has taken 9 years, let's say, from the incident to this report of this kind of resolution, so called. What does it say about the policing? We are not talking about individual named or nameable police employees. We're talking about the institution of policing. So we shall be checking on the reference to Professor Duff's writing extensively on abolishing the police. And then we shall update in the appropriate edition or editions. The contextual point about this policing that can be made without needing to kind of check on what this particular person has written about the policing. And we refer to the fact that there is a post called the mayor, the elected mayor in the name of London. And the elected mayor in the name of London, currently the incumbent is called Sadiq Khan. Now, if you check the coverage, the media coverage of Sadiq Khan's tenure or incumbency as the mayor of London in the name of London, and if you look for his quote thoughts, if he has any thoughts about the role that he's supposed to be playing This is the check that I'm making on the item called Matt is governed in London. So this is the description of the Metropolitan Police Authority. And the Metropolitan Police Authority's kind of role was transferred to the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, which is abbreviated to MOPAC. And the MOPAC website says, sorry, you cannot access this content. This page may now be unpublished. And it says, need a document on this page in an accessible format. So you can see the obstruction. You cannot even access this particular account. So we go back to the mayor's office. And what is the mayor doing about the policing? Because the Metropolitan Police Authority, by the name itself, suggested the involvement and the participation in the work of the authority, if it did any work, by more than one person. But if it is transferred to the mayor's office, then it is clearly limited to the whims and caprices and the failings and negligence of an individual who is the mayor himself. And the Daily Mail, being the main racist daily in the Haque, Fleet Street Haque, has got an editorial attacking the asylum seekers. But the first one of the three editorial pieces does refer to number 10 Downing Street, and we shall read this for the contextual relevance. This is the piece that is misleadingly headed Party Madness Plays into Putin's Hands. So they can't wait, the Daily Mail, before they can show Boris Johnson as Winston Churchill. So they're using the pretext of Putin, whether it's justified or not, to give him the support that they think he deserves, despite the fact that this piece itself shows that he's a liar, has been a lawbreaker, and has been unfit from the word go. So this is the first paragraph in the Daily Mail. Another day, another lurid account of a Downing Street party. Leave aside that it was a surprise for Boris Johnson's birthday and lasted just minutes. The constant drip of accusations goes on. So they are unhappy that Johnson has been exposed once again as having broken the law. They don't like the lawbreaker Johnson to be caught. And that gives away the Daily Mail. And their editorial ends by condemning Vladimir Putin as a tyrant. And they're painting Johnson as a Democrat. Can you believe that? You can believe that. That's the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail wants Boris Johnson to succeed. And there are subtle pieces all over the place in the Daily Mail to undermine and understate and underrate Nusrat Ghani. And their line against Nusrat Ghani throughout has been that she is intellectually challenged. That's the line they're promoting. The gun is upsetting them, but she's not intellectually challenged because she has got a few kind of official kind of degrees, etc., from British academic institutions. So they are not, the Daily Mail is not interested in the evidence. And the headline or the heading, well, headline, let's say, on the 2-page spreads clearly backs Boris Johnson. It says number 10 hits back in new party storm. And this is the piece headed frustration, anger, and the question, will Boris ever get out of this mess? Now let's see how they excuse Johnson in this piece. This analysis by Jason Groves, who is described as the political editor of the Daily Mail, whether it is his politics or the politics of the Daily Mail itself, is not obviously clear, but this has to be part of the agenda. The Paul Decker is back as the overall editor-in-chief. So let's see what he said, Paul Jason Groves. As revelations broke of yet another lockdown, I'll read that again. As revelations broke of yet another lockdown gathering in number 10 Downing Street last night, the mood in Downing Street was one of frustration, bordering on anger, with a dash of despair thrown in. Now, this is like Boris Johnson speaking. It's not against his law breaking, his lying, his denials, and most certainly not about his anti Muslim racist sacking of Nusrat Ghani. While allies of Boris Johnson, this is the second paragraph starting with the allies. Nothing, no sign whatsoever of Boris Johnson being criticized by anyone. While allies of Boris Johnson furiously disputed the details of so-called birthday bash thrown for the Prime Minister by number 10 staff. It's not organized by him. It's the staff who are to be blamed. Yes? And the whole thing is a whole list of excuses for Boris Johnson. So this is not an analysis. This is a disgusting piece of lies by the so-called political editor, the political idiot. The political idiot. So can we find anything in the Financial Times which you call the financial crimes? So their heading in their editorial in the Financial Crimes also is going to be another desperate look to find excuses and pretexts to excuse Johnson. And they too are undermining Nusrat Ghani. And it's an editorial in the Financial Crimes, which is stupid once again. Now read this again and you can see how stupid it is. So read the last paragraph in the Financial Crimes in defense, in support of Boris Johnson. We shall go back to the piece 2 paragraphs previously. They are promoting Sadiq Khan, but let's read the last paragraph in the Financial Crimes that reads, Cabinet Office scrutiny of Ghani's claims is important and overdue, though it may struggle with a matter that comes down to one person's word against another. How can they write this? It's not about one person. Even stooges, career stooges like Sajid Stupid and Nadim Zahawi have clearly defended Nusrat Ghani and supported her so far. They wouldn't have done that if they had not known that she was telling the truth about that, and that truth needs to be recognized. Both Sajid Stupid and Nadim Zahawi have been members of the government, and they would not have been prepared to support the statement that Nusrat Ghani has made had they not been very clear about the authenticity of the evidence that she represents in that statement, that allegation, because they would want to keep their own careers. And they cannot be dismissed as being part of a conspiracy to get rid of Johnson, who is the front person in the cabal that they are members of. So the Financial Crimes is lying and undermining Nusrat Ghani. And the Financial Crimes is repeating Johnson's denial in this disguised form. What is needed is a wide-ranging probe encompassing the parliamentary party. This is an issue of values and ethics, but also of electoral appeal for a party that underperforms with Muslim voters. Ultimately, the best way to deal with racism is through a culture of intolerance towards intolerance set by the leader. Johnson has fallen down on this as on so many other issues. Whether or not he survives, that needs to change, but that is That is a compounded stupidity on the part of the lying mental slave who has written this. Whoever, if it is the Lebanese-born editor, then of course she is a mental slave again. If it is somebody else, then that is a lie, as racist lie, an anti-Muslims pretext disguised as the editorial. And the paper claims to be without fear and without favor. And there is this description. First of all, these stories must be intolerant of Islamophobia is itself anti-Muslim, that whole heading. And then the subheading to that, Johnson has fallen. Now read that again. Johnson has failed to set the right tone from the top. Is it a matter of tone only? It's not. It's far from a tone. Now, let's go back to the paragraph where they are kind of citing Sadiq Khan. Allegations of conservative Islamophobia long predate Johnson's premiership. Warsi pushed for an independent inquiry in 2018, citing years of grievance and pointing to Lord Zach Goldsmith's distasteful 2016 campaign for London mayor, when he was accused of conducting a smear campaign against his Muslim rival Sadiq Khan. And then before that paragraph, all allegations of racism are hardly a Tory preserve. A damning report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party found serious failures of process and leadership under its former leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Labour's anti-Semitism, however egregious, felt to an extent like a problem that had been imported with Corbynism. Now, this whole thing is completely ignorant. Now, it says that what may be a decisive week for his premiership began dismally for Boris Johnson. The Prime Minister was compelled to order a Cabinet Office inquiry into a former minister's allegations that she was sacked from government because of concerns surrounding her Muslimness. It doesn't say because of alleged concerns surrounding her Muslimness. It says without any qualification, unconditionally repeats the lying line of Johnson and his anti-Muslim apologies. And the financial crimes becomes an anti-Muslim weapon, an apologies for Johnson and the brigade or the cabal that he fronts. And then they persistently understate Nusrat Ghani as a lone individual. She is not. Because they, in the same piece, they admit the 2018 demand by Sayyida Warsi for an independent inquiry. And Sayyida Warsi, citing years of grievances and pointing to Lord Zach Goldsmith's distasteful 2016 campaign for London mayor. So the financial crimes is factually wrong, ethically wrong, contextually wrong, evidentially wrong, and is taking the side of the anti-Muslims. Nusrat Ghani says that after being sacked as a transport minister in February 2020, reshuffle, she was told her Muslimness had been raised as an issue, and her status as a Muslim woman minister made some Tory colleagues uncomfortable. Such an idea will be objectionable and unsettling for many. Not everyone, they say many. As Baroness Saida Warsi, a former Tory party chair, has noted, being removed from a job because of a protected characteristic would be unlawful. Mark Spencer, chief whip, has called the allegation completely false and said he considered them defamatory. Johnson has said he takes Ghani's comments extremely seriously and is glad they will be investigated. What a load of rubbish. But as Westminster awaits a serious senior officials reporting to Downing Street parties during lockdown, Ghani's claims put his stewardship under new scrutiny. Since her complaints surrounded her removal as a minister, they should have been referred for an official inquiry when she raised them with the Prime Minister in July 2020, not just a party probe as he proposed. His U turn now, he is severely politically weakened, comes 18 months too late. The Prime Minister himself was rightly criticized for a 2018 newspaper column likening women wearing burqas to letterboxes. His defenders point to the fact that he leads Britain's most diverse cabinet. Yet Ghani's reluctance to have her complaint handled as a party matter is understandable given repeated charges of anti-Muslim prejudice against the Conservatives. Allegations of racism are hardly a Tory preserve, etc., as we have read. Now, the financial crimes is absolutely wrong, despite the appearance that it is partially sympathetic to Nusrat Ghani. But in the context of the whole thing, the financial crimes is in denial and it is denying the existence of racism, generally an existence of particularly anti-Muslim racism in particular. Now, what is the time now? We have come to about 2 hours. Let's see the time. So this edition began at about 11:30, just a minute or 2 or 3 minutes before. And 11:30, 12:30, 13:27. So let's see if we can include some other comments on the issue of Johnson's parties and the issue of Johnson's anti-Muslim lies and prejudice. The reference in the Financial Crimes editorial to Johnson comparing Muslim women wearing burqas to bank robbers and letterboxes is not a one-off thing. When Johnson first stood for election as mayor at the expense of London, the incumbent at the time was, of course, Ken Lying Still Livingstone. And Ken Lying Still Livingstone, instead of talking about democracy, instead of talking about the corruption of Johnson's career, instead of all the other wrongs that Johnson was guilty of then and is still guilty of, focused in particular on Johnson's racist comments. Now, what good did that do to the political kind of interests of Ken Lying Still Livingstone? It hardly did. Why? Because the Labour Party as a whole, as whose candidate Ken Livingstone was fighting the election, the Labour Party as a whole was racist, was anti-Muslim, and nothing has been done politically across the board by the Labour Party, either locally or in London or UK-wide or in England-wide kind of way, to recognize the existence of racism and to treat racism as a serious, as a major crime against society, against democracy. The fact that Johnson got in at the 2008 election for the so-called mayor is also evidence that Ken Livingstone failed to come across as the leader as the democratic leader that the people of London needed or desired, let alone asked for. When Ken Livingstone tried challenging the same Boris Johnson at the 2012 election, Livingstone got involved in something that, to most people observing his politics and political career, had not anticipated. That is to say, Ken Livingstone was actually ambushed by the London media that actually supported Boris Johnson against Ken Livingstone. And the ambush was based on the allegation that Ken Livingstone had lied in his income tax returns, as to various parts of his income from various sources. And Livingstone and Johnson appeared together on an LBC show that was hosted by Nick Ferrari. Now, Nick Ferrari is a racist and is a serious supporter of Boris Johnson on the right wing. And Nick Ferrari did everything during that short kind of argument between Johnson and Livingstone to allow Johnson to come across as the honest person or the honest party in the kind of equation. Now, despite our consistent condemnation of Ken Livingstone's own defects, as compared to Boris Johnson, Ken Livingstone can be called an idiot, but he is not anything like as dishonest as Boris Johnson, let's say. And yet, on that occasion on the LBC encounter, Ken Livingstone began to slide, that is to say, fall down. And he kept losing the momentum at every single encounter with Boris Johnson. And the media, mainly the television media, including Sky News and ITV and BBC London, they all supported Boris Johnson. Slightly, not kind of in a significant way, but they did side with and back Boris Johnson. Now, it is not yet known as to the date when Jennifer Arcuri actually met Boris Johnson, because her latest revelations and admissions that she and Johnson had a 4-year affair when Johnson was in the post of mayor at the expense of London. They suggest that she and Johnson might have met near the election of 2012 or before, slightly before or slightly after. whatever the actual date and whatever the actual length of the illicit, adulterous relationship between Johnson and Jennifer Arcuri. Arcuri's latest addition and clarification confirms that even she was hesitant when Johnson was brazenly breaking the law and breaking the values of morality and ethics and democracy. And he was defying even Jennifer Arcuri's advice for caution, asserting to her that I'm the mayor. This is my city. I can do whatever I like. Now, after this particular admission, which makes him a fascist, he is still in place. And the Daily Mail and the scum are still supporting him. And the Labour Party is failing. The Labour Party is failing completely to make this the occasion, the week, for the end of Boris Johnson at number 10 Downing Street. Why? Because Keir Starmer, is a conservative. He's a supporter of the right wing. And he's a racist. He's an anti-Muslim. And this piece by Hugo Guy in the I newspaper is again singing the praise of Boris Johnson, saying that Dominic Cummings is doing a favor to Boris Johnson, and the more attacks he mounts against Johnson, the more support Johnson gets. So we go back to the defining theme for this broadcast. This is the Baby Angel Geronimo edition of the KhoodeelaarTV television broadcast only on the internet, not on the satellite or the terrestrial or cable networks, but it is the same accessibility. This can be accessed on YouTube, and it is treatable as a television broadcast in technical terms. And this is the description, original world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. That's what we call this program. Not this edition only, but the series of these programs, this whole thing. Now, looking at the picture, given credit to for the picture is Peter Nichols, /Reuters. And the caption to the picture: supporters of Julian Assange outside the Royal Courts of Justice in London on Monday. And as he said, Assange can seek appeal against extradition. This is overstated. He can do an appeal, but the Supreme Court will not really support him. Why? Because the Supreme Court hardly kind of supports litigation or complaints or appeals by people who oppose the UK government. The UK court system is a corrupt, prostitute court system. It's a stooge system. And we go to the cases that we have referred to in the past. 3 judges we mentioned: Murray, Griffiths, and Stacey. Stacey is a woman. Murray and Griffiths were 2 men. all High Court judges, and all kind of supporting the depraved DEFRA lies, criminal lies, misrepresentations, falsehoods, and untruths cruelly devised to demonize the most innocent baby angel Geronimo on the face of the earth. And on Griffiths, Murray and Griffiths and Stacy issued identical statements in support of the depraved DEFRA and against the innocent, most innocent baby angel Geronimo, the most healthy baby angel Geronimo. And all these stooge High Court judges were aided and abetted by Boris Johnson and his cabal, and were in effect supported by the liar Keir Starmer and his co-liar, now the so-called shadow cabinet minister for at the expense of health, Wes Streeting. So there may be an appeal, but it is doomed to be treated with contempt by the corrupt judiciary. It doesn't matter whether the judiciary has got the platform as the Supreme Court. Because as they said, in May 2021, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the crooks and liars and racists and stooges in the Home Office who wrongly, untruthfully, corruptly, racistly, in a widely anti-Muslim kind of move, removed the citizenship by birth from Shamima Begum. So the Court of Appeal said that Shamima Begum's application to return to the UK to challenge the removal of her citizenship by birth was rejected by the Supreme Court without giving any really truthful reasons, really legal, fair, and just argument reason, let alone evidence. And that decision by the Home Office, the Home Secretary was in place, was Sajid Stupid. That decision to take away Shamima Begum's citizenship, British citizenship by birth, that was made without stupid Jabid showing any evidence that Shamima Begum had committed a crime. And in addition to that failure, the Supreme Court actually violated or ignored all the treaty obligations that the UK as a state was under, and the state includes the judiciary under the various treaties, international treaties, declarations, conventions, and agreements and statements, as we have been saying regularly. Literally thousands of such agreements, treaties, statements, conventions are available, are ratified, are part of the UK's international treaty status. Now, if you look at the contents of the papers, like the Financial Crimes, the Scum, the Guardian, the Times, the I newspaper, and the broadcasting counterparts, you will find no mention of any of these treaties. Absolutely none. And we have been saying that, and that is the central kind of evidential finding about the bankruptcy and the immorality, illegality, corruption, and inherent and manifest and brazen injustice of the UK state, either as expressed in the prostituted, corrupt judicial bureaucracy, which is absolutely racist, or as evident in the behavior of the congenital liar in place as the prime minister, who is getting support from this scum, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the daily bribing and buying Boris Johnson grub, Daily Telegraph that is, and from the Times and from the Guardian, despite their appearances of some temporarily excitable headlines. So this has been the world exclusive original diagnosis of Fleet Street and the rest of the media and the government and the parliament and the, of course, the regime as fronted by Boris Johnson, the congenital liar. The congenital liar is the phrase that has been used about Boris Johnson by the French ambassador to the UK until 2017. A woman called Sylvie Bermann. Sylvie Bermann spoke to the British media and we shall recap on that one. We shall go over the piece that she
Sylvie Bermann accuses the Prime Minister of using untruths as a game and an instrument of power. Well, Sylvie Bermann joins me now live from Paris. Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon here on Sky News. Now, some bold claims that you're making. What's your basis for calling the Prime Minister a liar?
Well, first, I'm not accusing him. It's just a portrait, and it's, the second part of the book where I explain who was responsible for Brexit. And about the lies, I think it's not a diplomatic secret or a journalist scoop. I mean, it's everywhere in the British press, and there's even mentions in his biographies. There was a book by Peter Auburn. It's something which is well known, and it's really a few lines in my book. And and I give some examples. The first one was when he was fired by the Times. Afterwards, there was what was called the Euromyth, when he invented some things about the EU regulations, and then the bus with the 350 million pounds supposed to be given to the EU and would be given back to the NHS. I mean, all that was in the press, and it's not something which should be surprising.
Well, let's come back to the aim of the book, of course, the focus of the book, Goodbye Britannia, looking at Brexit. And actually, one of the things that you mentioned, you say that, the Prime Minister, along with David Cameron, are the guilty parties in Goodbye Britannia. You say that it's a disastrous act of self-sabotage, of course, Brexit, by the country that was doing rather well out of its EU membership. But actually, the facts speak for themselves. 52% of the public voted to leave and 48% voted to remain. So clearly, not everybody was happy in this membership.
No, I agree, but it was not always about the EU. Sometimes it was a scapegoat. It was about immigration. It was about identity of the British or of the English. I wrote that book to explain that situation while I was ambassador to the UK, and why I said that the UK was doing rather well, and even more than that, is that the UK was very influential in Brussels and contributed to make the single market. And in London, when it was really a booming city, a real world city, and everybody from France and maybe from other countries came to London in order to find recipes for success and optimism at that time also. And I think well, of course, it was London, and maybe that's the reason why we didn't see really the other parts of the country. But it's because I remember that David Cameron said at that time that the UK had both the best of both worlds, and in a certain way, that's true. That's the way we saw it. That's the reason why there was a surprise among the diplomatic community, but all the countries, in fact, and not only European countries, also other countries, the Indian, the Japanese, all that has been said. I mean, there is nothing really extraordinary.
Well, let's look at the vaccine rollout then. Our Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has just confirmed that 20 million people in the UK have just...
So the Sky News, that particular interview, we have not shown, but we have just played a part of the audio. That particular item was being kind of presented by an African origin woman presenter. And she was playing the role there as a mental slave because she moved away from examining the main charge that Sylvie Bermann made against Boris Johnson, that he's a liar. So looking for locating this. So this is the piece that the Times Online still has online, which is headed Sylvie Bermann. Yes, Boris is a congenital liar. and your country has decided to scuttle itself. This is the piece this is a paywall, so we'll read the bit that is available despite the paywall. This is dated the Saturday, 27th of February 2021. It's not every day that ambassador of one of Britain's closest allies calls the Prime Minister a congenital liar. Sylvie Bermann, who was until 2017 France's envoy at the court of St. James's, is amused by the fuss in London over her portrait of Boris Johnson as a clever but reckless opportunist with no regard for the truth. Johnson, she wrote in her new book, Goodbye Britannia, within quotes, lies to embellish reality, lies as a game, but also as an instrument of power. A shower of Brexiteer wrath has been lobbed back across the channel this week. I have come in for the usual stuff. Without us, you'd still be under the Third Reich and so on, Bermann says, talking in her flat on, and then the paywall comes on. And let's see if we can find a Guardian. Now there are more than one piece about Johnson in the Guardian. It's impossible to work seriously with Boris Johnson's government, Sylvie Bermann, on refugees, fishing, and the NI protocol. We need cooperation, but Britain and France are a long way from an entente cordiale. Sylvie Bermann is a former French ambassador to the UK. So there is quite a few. There is a set of items about Sylvie Bermann's opinion about Johnson being dishonest. She acknowledges that she is clever but is dishonest. And this piece is about Michael Jackson abusing Janet Jackson. And the highlight is that Michael used to call me pig and a slut. I laughed, but deep down it hurt, says Janet Jackson. So we don't need to elaborate on that because that is clear enough. And like the Daily Mail, this scum is also against asylum seekers and refugees. And they are talking about Ukraine in the editorial. As we said, there is this piece about Nusrat Ghani in the scum that attempts to kind of dismiss her. That is part of the agenda followed by all the papers in Fleet Street in the main about Nusrat Ghani.